All right.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sangeeta, for a wonderful talk about fantasy literature, which I know very little about, but got to know more about through your wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
My talk is going to take you back to stark reality of the 21st century as experienced in Australia by Lebanese immigrants. So I would like to thank Sarah for the wonderful introduction. And I just want to say that what I'm reading today is a very small part of chapter 6 of my forthcoming book on code switching. So my focus is quite technical. It's about when languages alternate or dialects alternate or accents alternate, both on the levels of dialogue and narration inside of a novel, and what that alternation means and what meanings it could possibly carry for the otherwise Anglophone text. So the title of my talk is as announced, Loving Between the Lines, World Literature and Islamic Intertexts in the Labs. So introduction. Born in Sydney's Inner West, Australia, to a first-generation Lebanese migrant family, 40-something Michael Muhammad Ahmad describes his writing as, quote, the act of moving from silence to speech as a revolutionary gesture, end of quote. Ahmad's novels are, as one critic has called them, a call to arms for all sidelined groups to reclaim their own stories and histories, which, as the author himself believes, have been hijacked by mainstream white Australia. Anthropologist Lebanese Australian Ghassan Haj sums up the Anglos' mastery over others on this continent as simply whiteness. This term being, as he says, a fantasy position of cultural dominance born out of the history of European expansion. Ghassan Haj further explains that the distinction is not made between white and non-white immigrants, but rather between those who appear to be from the third world and those who do not. And Ahmad's novel, The Labs, published in 2018, only 7 years ago or 8 years ago, Arab is hyphenated with Australian because this hybridized identity comprises young people from different ethnic groups who walk, dress, and speak Arabic or English in a particular way. They include lower middle class Arabs, Middle Easterners in general, Asians, and Africans. Now, onto the main paper. The Labs features numerous language-related choices, specifically code switching between and sometimes among standard English, formal Arabic, spoken Lebanese Arabic, Western Sydney accents, and subcultural slangs, while occasionally juxtaposing some of these with less familiar traditions, namely world literature and Islamic culture. In this tripartite text, first-person narration is delivered by Bani, aged 14, 16, and 19. Bani understands that being perceived as no more than a lab means he will be unable to move between different social circles or to inhabit a multidimensional personality. As he and we as readers find out, code switching proves to be the best means for such crossings because of its malleability and endless permutations. In my forthcoming book, titled Piecing It Together, I argue that periodic shifts between both literary and religious discourses, often in contrast with oral communication in Arabic and or in English, bespeak Bani's own complex identitarian makeup in emotional, cognitive, and social terms as he strives to distance himself from his crass schoolmates towards acceptance by mainstream white Australians. In this presentation, I argue that the Labs features what I call and coin as discursive code switching. I do so by zeroing in on the ways Bani resorts to both medieval and 20th century examples of world literature, while in most instances also alluding to the Quran in order to express his unconsummated love for his English teacher, English literature teacher, called Mrs. Layla Haimi, who is twice his age when he falls for her in middle school at the age of 14. I show how Bani's citations from Western and Eastern classics, delivered in ways that reference the Quran, express his platonic feelings, which also reveal suppressed sexual desire. Attention grabbing is the teacher's own married name, Mrs. Layla Haimi, or Haimi, because it has several connotations. Haimi, mentioned 71 times in the novel, is not a typical Lebanese surname. In Latin transliteration, and without further specification, the letter H in the first syllable, ha, can either have a soft ha sound or a sharp ha sound. In the first case, ha'im would have two meanings. Again, a wanderer who has lost his way and someone who is madly in love, and sometimes both. In the second case, it means someone who hovers, ha'im, with a sharp H. Hovering describes the opposite activity of wandering because it implies waiting, sometimes especially near someone in a near or shy manner, as Bani often does near Layla in the classroom, in the corridors, and on the playground at Punch Bowl Boys High School. Also in Arabic, when I is attached to a noun as a suffix, al-ya, it becomes the grammatical marker of the first person possessive form, meaning mine. So whether intended by the author Ahmad or not, I read Haimi as a fabricated surname that embodies Bani's push and pull strategy towards his love object. In marketing, a push strategy is to push a product at a customer, while a pull strategy pulls a customer towards a product, the product being Bani and the customer, Layla, the teacher. A classical yet common name, Layla, mentioned 39 times in the text, is also heavy on illusion. Bani writes, quote, I was 15 years old and longing for Layla Haimi like Majnun longed for Layla. In reference to the 12th century romance of Layla and Majnun by the epic Persian poet Nizami Ghanjawi, who lived between 1140 and 1209, which narrates the love story of two 7th century Bedouin Arabs, Qais ibn al-Mulawah, of the Banu Amir tribe, and Layla bint Sa'd. Qais expresses his passion in elegiac lyrics, thus earning the epithet Majnoon, which literally means possessed or mad, similar to Bani, who recites from renowned novels. Part of Bani's infatuation stems from Layla's combination of Eastern and Western features, since she is Lebanese and Muslim like the rest of us, but her skin is like milk, he says. He eventually reminds us of their special relationship akin to a pact. Quote, nobody but me listens when she says, read James Joyce. That night, after he reads the 1914 short story The Dead by Joyce and recites the following day the final lines to her, she commands him again, read Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And again the next day, he recites to her the last translated line from Garcia's 1968 short story, A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. First, it is no coincidence that both first names, Gabriel Conroy and Michael Fury, the latter being the same as Ahmad's very own, are featured in Joyce's The Dead. Gabriel sees at the end of the story how his wife Greta still loves Michael, the frail teenager who died of exposure, in the hope of seeing her just one last time. Consciously or not, in Bani's own mind, in the protagonist's mind, he will remain like ghost-like Michael in the story by Joyce, the only real, however sexually unfulfilled love for Layla. Michael's liminality between the living and the dead is reiterated in the story by Marquez. In The Labs, the story by, or the novel by Ahmad, Bani hopes that his quotation from A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings will make Layla both appreciate and remember him at some point in the future, quote, as no longer an annoyance in her life, but an imaginary dot on the horizon of the sea, end of quote, that is forever wandering away, however paradoxically, by hovering between the sea and the sky. Thus, in both cases, whether as a young adult or as an old surrogate figure, Bani remains spiritually near Layla, even if physically far and inaccessible. The third command comes from Layla is read Lolita. Unlike the first two, this one specifies the title published in 1955, but not its author, obviously Vladimir Nabokov. Therefore, while Bani chooses which works to read by Joyce and Marquez, he is merely given the title of this novel by the Russian-American author that tells of a grown man's devouring passion for a 12-year-old girl. Bani says, quote, I read it over the 3 following nights, and then I ran with it for 3 years, that is, wandered with an A, believing that I understood it, that Mrs. Layla Haimi had recommended the book to me in code, end of quote. Although not mentioned by Bani, part of the coded message is the fact that his teacher and the female fictional character share the same initials, L and H, Layla Haimi and Lolita Hayes. Furthermore, he identifies with Humbert in order to insist that his love for Layla is equally innocent because it is poetry-like. Bani likes to think of Humbert's poems for Lolita, like Majnoon's for Layla, as expressive of an ideal but an impossible love. What Bani skips is the chapter in which Humbert does eventually sleep with Lolita. Phonetically, Marquez's first name, Gabriel, evokes in Bani's bilingual mind, Jibrail, the archangel featured in the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament, and the Quran. It is not a coincidence, therefore, that all three texts contain references to or hints at winged creatures, creatures with wings, Gabriel and the dead, the old man with wings in Marquez's story, and angels in Lolita. But what is most forceful is that each time Layla commands that he read something, she sounds like the archangel Jibrail, who ordered 40-year-old Prophet Muhammad to recite, in the name of God who created man, اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. When God's emissary transmitted to him the very first revelation, which later became the opening verse or ayah in chapter 96 of the Quran, titled The Blood Clot. Bani says, quote, Mrs. Haim's small black pupils begin to expand from her blue irises, and now it is as though I am looking into the heart of the archangel Jibrail, end of quote. And he often sees his own reflection in her pupils. In paintings, Gabriel is usually clothed in blue or white garments, the same two colors repeatedly and obsessively associated with Layla's own respective eye and skin colors. Furthermore, the word pupil is two-directional, displaying a push and pull dynamic, as I mentioned earlier. The inner black centers of Layla's eyes, which expand as they see Bani, her pupil, by pulling in more light, and Bani, who pushes himself by making his own image grow larger in her pupils. Even if not a prophet, obviously, Bani sees himself as the chosen one, while other students are described by him as blind, deaf, and dumb, for being at once the recipient, he himself, and distributor of literary, if not actually divine words and meanings, with Layla as Jibrail. When Layla asks Bani, what about the rest? Following his recitation of the last lines from Lolita, he wonders, the rest? What do you mean? These are the last lines. Instead of clarifying, she smiled at him like a schoolgirl in slacks and carried on walking as his heart thumped. Mrs. Layla Haimi and I are caught between sex and skin, he says, between war and peace. Ending the second line with the three words that make up the title of Leo Tolstoy's 1869 novel War and Peace, while omitting quotation marks or italics to highlight it as such, normalizes Bani's tendency to juxtapose regular English language speech with literary language, in this case, to the point of intrasentential fusion. The word caught implies an act of hovering again. Layla's response in the form of a smile prolongs the love intrigue for another 115 pages until we reach her final day at school, when she whispers to Bani a euphemized line from Humbert's poem in Lolita, quote, a year from now, you will have left me where the weeds decay, end of quote. The original being, and I shall be dumped where the weed decays. Upon hearing this, Bani remembers her earlier question, so he asks, and what about the rest, Mrs. Layla Haimi? Oblivious to the fact that the rest literally constitutes the opening of the next and last line in said poem. At this point, she reveals the correct answer. Well, the rest is rust and stardust, after replacing and in the original with well to make it more conversational. This sentence signals the futility of all endeavors which end, whether in earthly or otherworldly fashion, in decay. Only then does Bani realize that the text is yet another phrase from Lolita, in fact from a poem inside the novel that is an intertext having no existence outside of it, in the same way their relationship can only thrive within fixed poetic and protective narrative borders. In addition, I see a stronger yet better hidden meaning lurking in the question about the rest, but this time in the relation to Bani's own name. In Arabic, Bani means the children or the descendants of Bani. So Bani Adam, the protagonist's full name, means the sons and by implication the daughters of Adam, that is humankind, according to the story of creation in the book of Genesis in the Old Testament and retold in both the New Testament and the Quran. Adam or Bani Adam is mentioned 25 times in the Quran, about 6 times more than Muhammad, who is mentioned, funnily enough, only 4 times and in different surahs, whereas the word Ahmad is mentioned only once. But Bani in Arabic also means a builder. He who builds, الذي يبني, the construction of meaning being one of them. Striking is also the fact that the 114th and last surah in the Quran is titled An-Nas, or mankind, even though, chronologically speaking, it was not the last that Gabriel delivered to the prophets. First, like the prophet, Bani is but a vessel for higher and more elusive meanings transmitted by an original author, whether that author be God, in the case of the Quran and the Islamic tradition, or Ahmad as author of literary fiction. Second, Bani's response to Layla, that those are the last lines, based on a literal understanding of her question, becomes at once a self-referential and a meta-narrative statement about any conclusiveness, be it that of the novel itself, titled The Labs, the Quran, an emotion, or even an interpretation. Just like the Quran, the sacred text that, according to Tarif Khalidi, most self-consciously invites its readers to engage with it exegetically, the Labs invites its recipients to intervene creatively for a fuller comprehension. In both cases, ultimately, only the receiver or the reader is the bani, or the builder or constructor of creative arguments. Conclusion. I have argued in this paper that in the novel The Labs, Bani, the protagonist, is engaged in a range of linguistic maneuvers as he negotiates his complex identity in the diaspora. Furthermore, my reading extended the definition of code switching by identifying meaningful shifts between different regular languages and specialized ones pertaining to both word literature and the Quran, resulting in what I called discursive code switches. Finally, I have demonstrated that it is in the interstitial spaces that exist alongside the borders of multiple and at times incompatible languages, be they real or metaphorical or discursive, that attempts at both self-definition and self-expression, not to mention self-realization, can be located. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hout, for that wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Sarah.
We still have Arabella Adams. She is not here. Did you have to let her?
I admitted.
You admitted her?
I admitted everybody who tried to be in the waiting room.
Oh, okay.
There's nobody there in the waiting room.
Okay.
It was just us. There's Jesse Gia. There's a name, Jesse Gia.
Yes.
And there's another name, Hallie.
Yes.
Hallie Niederman is our colleague at AUB.
Oh, okay.
She knows Sarah. She's next door.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but she's gone now. She was there and then she vanished. Yeah.
Yeah. She was there.
Yeah.
But
So,
yeah.
I'm not sure how to proceed since we're missing a person.
Well,
Right.
do you
We're
think you
good
want to
on time, right, Sarah? We're good on time.
We're good
Yeah.
on time. We have
We're good
until
on
10:30.
Do you want to start discussion and then whenever she comes in, we
Yeah.
can...
I think so. I
Yeah,
agree with
sure.
Sangeeta to make good use of the time, and then when she joins, we'll listen to her.
Yeah, sure. That works very well. So we can start Q&A. And originally I had planned for like 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A.
Mhm.
So we can start this now. And then whenever Arabella shows up, she can present. Okay, awesome.
Can I start with a question for my colleague Sangeeta?
Yeah.
I know very little of.
She said my mic didn't work.
Oh,
Do you
we
see
can
that
hear
note
you.
there? There's a note here that Jessie Gia says, sorry, my mic didn't work.
Oh,
Oh,
Can you guys see the
participant.
chat?
She's a listener, so
Huh?
she's the participant. She's not presenting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but she can hear us, right? I mean, she
But
can
she might have wanted to say
participate.
something.
She can hear us. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I don't know much about fantasy literature, and obviously I was too old for the Harry Potter series when it started coming out in year 2000. I remember being in Edinburgh, and then I kept seeing Harry Potter in window shops, and at some point I asked very naively, I was 35. I was like, "Who's Harry Potter? Who is this like up and coming new author?" Not to only to realize that he's actually the the fictional protagonist of a whole series of fantasy literature. You mentioned Avatar, and I just did some research while you were reading your paper. So the first one, it's of course obviously directed by James Cameron, right? The entire franchise, and the first one came out in 2009, and three have come out. I watched the first two. I didn't watch the last one, which is Ash and Fire, I think, the one that came out this year. But I discovered like very quickly using my phone that there are two planned, a fourth and a fifth installment, one in 2029 and one in 2031. We are in 2026. 2031 is only 5 years from now. And today I was watching like this video of robots, Chinese robots dancing, while fully clad in such a way that you would think them human. And I'm just wondering, like, how could anyone today in 2026 even write the transcript or the screenplay, whatever it's called, for it? For the fifth installment, when we're seeing new things happening every day, or maybe they have not been written yet, maybe they're just planned, but so I don't know if you could tell us anything about, if you see any evolution in thoughts, not only in technique, because obviously technique must have changed a lot since 2009, but if you see any evolution in this franchise and why you think that there are two planned for the future, which we haven't reached yet in real time. What does this imply about us as humans, about Hollywood, maybe, about the need for ongoing need for fantasy literature? If there's anything you could say about that. So it's a general question. I understand. Yeah. So.
Well, the first thing I want to say is it's interesting that you said that you're not acquainted with fantasy literature much,
Yeah.
but a very old man with enormous wings
Yes.
is a
Yes.
fantasy.
Of course. Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
thought the
Absolutely
whole
right.
time I'm laughing inside, I'm thinking, oh my God, yeah.
It's because I haven't
In
taught
fact,
it in ages.
we
That's
studied it in my
why.
class. My professor on my committee, he assigned it
Oh,
in
yeah.
class.
Okay. Great.
It's a great story, like very good
Oh, that's
background.
wonderful. It's
Yeah.
it's wonderful and heartbreaking too. I mean, in a way.
So heartbreaking, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So the Avatar, I only mentioned it. It's not part of my work.
No, it's not. I know it's not your
It's
focus.
just
I
in
was
the
just,
intro. But
yeah.
yeah, when you were saying that it's hard to understand how you could write a fourth and a fifth when we're barely here.
Exactly. We're not there
But
yet.
but as an academic, I don't know if you find this. I
Mm.
have plans for future journal articles, you
Sure,
know,
sure.
that I might not send out for another 4 or 5 years, but as some
Right.
rough sketch I have,
Yeah,
I don't have time
blueprints.
to do it. Yeah, I don't have time to do it, but I've written a draft, something
Right,
rough.
right.
So it may be like
Okay.
that when you're working on one thing, you have branches of ideas and then you set
Right.
those aside. And
Absolutely.
when you work with a creative team, not just by yourself, you
Yes,
inspire each other so the pieces just come together. Suddenly you have an
absolutely.
hour free for a coffee break with somebody on this crew, and you're
Mm-hmm,
saying, "Oh, the
mm-hmm.
next time we'll do this and this."
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's my guess.
No, I agree with you. Absolutely, absolutely. And creative writing, especially now writing for any Hollywood productions or even, like the creative writing as a team, like people coming together to write. Sometimes you have the same franchise and you have different people directing different episodes or different writers for different episodes, or all working on the same script, which doesn't happen among academics. I'm like, I've never published with another academic, like ever.
That would be so nice, like a group
Yes,
think tank for.
exactly. So they have the kind
Um,
of brainstorming amongst them that we don't have necessarily in academic writing. I mean,
yeah,
brainstorming and bouncing ideas off each other is something that we don't really do much in academic writing, but is becoming almost the hallmark of cinematic writing, especially
right.
when it comes to multi-episodic
And
series.
this
And
is this is a good question, and I'll go back to the Avatar question you asked. But
yeah,
in part of the '60s counterculture, I'm
mhm.
studying the mental health aspect and the
Yes,
sociology of it. Community was very important, and this is a
mhm.
problem. Like, how do we solve this isolation problem, ego problems in academia? How do we
Yes,
foster community in a way that and still keep the professionalism, not feel like anyone's compromising on anything?
right.
But I think that would be just so healthy for people to come together, you know,
Yes,
in the same way
absolutely.
people present on a panel together as one.
Yes,
Why not
right.
write a paper? Why not do more collaborative projects, have several
Yes,
aspects? So
yes.
I think
Right.
that would be a good problem and issue to be addressed for future, And
Absolutely.
then maybe
Absolutely.
decades they'll look back and say, oh, the old-fashioned conservative people, they didn't work in teams, they just did one at a time.
Right.
We'll look back
Exactly.
on. And what you were saying
Absolutely.
about Avatar, about, why the need
Yeah.
for it, the need
Yes.
for fantasy is a big question I'm trying to solve.
Yes.
I think it's a spiritual need. That's my thesis.
Is
But
it only spiritual? Like, it's obviously it's an escape to a world that doesn't exist yet, but that might exist or you hope will. But it also
well,
helps you to cope with your present, right?
I mean, Tolkien, there was a time where people had to be apologists for fantasy and worried that
Right.
people say, oh, it's an escapist thing.
Sure.
So I hope we're past that. That a lot of people say, let's hope we're past that. But there was a time where people say, oh, it's just escapist. But
Right.
it's actually
Of
a
course,
space
it's
you
not
go
just
into to
that. Yeah.
engage.
Right. Right.
But anyway, specifically for Avatar,
Uh-huh.
I think, and not even saying the word spiritual, there's so many aspects of it that are first and foremost relevant. First, the natural world. The
Hmm.
environment we're destroying, and that is the first. That's actually the main character in the story is
Right.
the forest.
Right.
It is so front and center, you cannot ignore it as in the background.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
respect for the environment. Not only
Right.
that, but symbolically, they're blue people, right? And they're
Yeah.
different
Yes.
people of different races. And
Hmm.
it brings up this idea of class, race, peoples, and
Hmm.
cultures. So now,
Hmm.
even within the indigenous people, there are different tribes, right? That they show
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
last movie. So conflicts and power dynamics, this happening in our world, and it's got to be addressed. And this
Of
helps
course. Of course. Absolutely.
the
Absolutely. Yeah.
political, the social, the environmental.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
systems of domination and control.
Right, right.
Yeah,
I was thinking also in terms of like, we talk about dystopian versus utopian literature, and sometimes
yeah,
it's a very fine line between what utopia is and whether this utopia that you are creating is based more on natural laws or the complete suspension of natural laws and the creation of something highly artificial. I'm thinking of like people like Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, 1984, the
yeah,
beginnings of like serious utopian and dystopian fiction.
yeah,
Nowadays, I mean, I'm really not familiar. I mean, I watch a lot of movies, but rarely fantasy. I mean, is fantasy literature being produced now more? It seems to me much more dystopian than ever. Is that a correct assessment, or is this an exaggeration, or too much of a skeptical view, or
yeah.
of current contemporary fantasy, including cinematic, fantasies? Are they more sort of dystopian than? Or is there a glimmer of hope that they offer? And if so, where is the silver lining in the problematics that they present usually in these artificial or sort of like
Well,
internet societies like avatars and others?
my main focus is the 60s,
The
counterpart.
60s,
So
yeah.
I'm more familiar with that.
Right, right.
But
Yeah, I know.
the fantasy literature in the last 10, 15 years, let's say, I'm not as familiar. Harry Potter, of course.
Okay, yeah, right,
But
right.
if
I
I go
understand.
to Barnes and Nobles, if I go to any bookstore and
Yes,
look at the new bestsellers every year,
right.
a lot of them are not dystopian. I
Okay.
may not be reading them, but I
Mhm.
can see that there's still a variety.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. All right.
but maybe there is this worry, that where's the
Mhm.
world going?
Right. I mean, now more than ever, we see like
Yeah,
the world order is it's different than we knew it a few years ago. So
yeah,
with so many threats looming and the ecology and the environment being in constant jeopardy, and we having reached the point of no return, and you hear all of these terms that make you wonder, like, are we going to be here in 100 years from now? And if so, in what shape and color, right? And
right.
are we learning from the mistakes of the past, or are we just repeating endlessly the same cycle of mistakes? So it's something, and I think fantasy literature really addresses those more than any other genre.
Yeah, it should also. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
And am
absolutely.
I able to be heard?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool. I fixed that. Okay, so uh as I am just a listener of the presentations, first off, both of you had really good presentations,
Thank you,
and
Jesse.
I got really, really inspired from both of your research.
Thank you.
And speaking of like fantasy literature, and I have just heard you guys talking about utopia and dystopian literature, and actually I'm currently like reading things related to utopia and dystopia. And one of the
Mhm.
things that is tied to utopia and dystopian literature is the concept of social imagination.
Mhm.
So it's basically like what ifs that people propose when we ask like what would happen if, for example, equality is fully achieved. For example, like there is no racial or gender discrimination, things like that. And actually, one of the primary like purposes in the origin of utopian this literature was political satire.
Yes.
It's like that's something that when I hear you guys talking about like today's fantasies, that I think what is interesting is that today's fantasies lacks this aspect, is that the satire that tied to, because today's fantasies, whether it's like what you said, Harry Potter or whatever series like novels that we
Yeah.
offer, they are pure escapes. They are pure like social imagination. Like then and then when they are made into films, like what's like most of the fantasies, like especially those that have sequels,
Yes.
this kind of social imagination makes the audience participation more passive. It's like rather those novels, those fictions, they allow like the imaginations for the audiences to participate and to actively participate in the social imagination, and they're therefore an escape. This time when they are made into films, it's like especially today's form of like acceptance of film is very passive. Unlike let's say a century ago when people are allowed to come and go in between theaters. Like they are not required to sit inside a dark room for the whole period of time. And due to these two factors that, currently, especially when we talk about fantasy in films, I think it would be an interesting point to, if you would like to talk about, film in your research, then it would be an interesting point to discuss like the medium of communication, the differences between, textual and, visual communications and how they impact the audience's perception of this imagined society, and how what they think of when you said when people watch the Avatar movie they feel sad. But what if it is because it's actually derived from a comic book, if I'm not mistaken, but like what if it's written in the text, right? Would people be more able to read the satire or the ironies that is portrayed in Avatar than simply feeling so sad that we are not able to live on that planet? Because I feel like that kind of reaction is relatively simple, relatively less complicated than if we are reading a novel, for example, about an avatar world. We are able to contemplate, we are able to think behind what is presenting the grand, social special effective message like image about the true message that the author is trying to convey with for example, colonialism, with environmentalism, right? So all in all, what I'm saying is that two things. One thing is that the like a very big difference between today's fantasy, whether it's utopia or dystopia. Like uh with let's say the how utopian literature originated as a pure political satire. And then the second is that the emergence of special effect films like CGI, and how they contribute to fantasy, but at the same time they influence audiences' perceptions, because I feel like at least that reaction that you mentioned when you are presenting, that was not what I thought of when I watched that film. I immediately grasped the colonial and environmental like message behind it. But as what you mentioned, not all like you need to consider the experiences and perceptions of audience group. Uh, but these are all like my observations and some. interesting points that, I think it's worth discussing if, you are going in that direction, but,
Mhm.
Well, on Friday, I'm doing a presentation just on exactly on that, on comparing a book, the film version and the book version,
Mm.
and
Which
the
film?
differences. It's the last unicorn.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. Mhm.
So, well, I'll go through that. So, I'm really glad you said that because that helps me feed into me as I'm going into Friday. But you are absolutely right. And one of the downsides to film is a lot of times, Hollywood can just go with formulas and tropes, right?
Mhm.
But
Right.
in recent times, I have noticed, first of all, Jesse, just to say, when you said the author's intention for a book, a lot of times, like I guess in the new generation of
Mhm.
literature analysis, the author doesn't intention doesn't matter. At least
Yeah.
that's the popular thing. So what
Right.
the author intended, whatever they intended, doesn't matter. It's what does the reader get from, it's a reader's
Mhm.
subjectivity. So given that, I think that there are two different ways that the two different media appeal to a human being, and each person's different, so there's no cookie cutter formula. But when you're
Mhm.
reading text, you see words, and that those words have to go through your brain to the cognitive section and come out. And we don't know, depending on person, how does it hit your emotions and your spirit. When you watch the visual, you get several different sensory perceptions. You get sound, you do get the language, you get the visual, you also get embodiment because acting performance is an art, right? So the body is conveying something. And you're right, this could be the bias of the film producer, what they want to convey. It may not be
Mhm.
what the author wants to convey.
Mhm.
But I have noticed that when the quality of film and even these series like Netflix or whatever streaming, the quality is so good, the acting is so good. And even if they're following a full formula, there's a way in which it engages your emotions in a way that for some people, maybe reading might not capture all the dimensions. And it may not hit that emotional aspect. But for others, it might. For others, you may just need a quiet space without visuals, without sound, without anything, and just the words go through. And then you can, so everyone's different. I can't make a formula, but maybe these are just some raw thoughts to say out loud.
Mhm. Thank you very. Can I add something, like my two
Yeah,
cents on
please,
this?
please. Yeah.
Absolutely. We live in an age of video games. Like I don't play video
Yeah.
games, but my twin girls do, and they just turned 24. They grew up with video games, and oftentimes, like I thought that this was overdone and that was a waste of time. And then one of them actually showed me what she was doing, and that is creating alternative endings. So when you're talking about the level of engagement that could be low or high, I think it is highest actually when it comes to video games.
Mhm.
Of course, when we watch a movie, depending on the depth, and when we read a text, also depending on the depth. Yes, of course, a movie is multi-sensorial, right, in a way that a text is not. But the level of engagement depends, I think, ultimately on the depth, regardless of the medium. And I'll give you one example. I went to see Wuthering Heights on Sunday.
Oh, you
Wuthering
did?
Heights, yes.
Okay.
Honestly, I was bored halfway
Oh,
through, and had it not been for the money, I might have. It is eye candy in every sense of the word, absolute eye candy. I mean, a lot of money has been spent
yeah.
on costumes, on cinematography, which is really eye-grabbing. It is very sensually fulfilling. Intellectually, zero. And the woman who did this, who the director, her name is Emerald. I forget her last name right now. Emerald something. She once said apparently that it was her favorite book, and somebody said jokingly, "Well, it must have been a coffee table book," because it left me in a state of intellectual emptiness. Like you don't know if it's a story of revenge. First of all, in the novel, there's never any sex. Nothing against that, but the movie is half. Basically, it's too graphic and it's unnecessary. And at some point, it became repetitive. So And somebody said actually that if you want to do this, do it, but don't call it Wuthering Heights. I mean, why stick to a novel that has a moral dimension and is almost gothic in conception and execution when you are really flattening it on the screen? I mean, literally and metaphorically flattening it. Just write your own Wuthering Heights and call it something else. So I think the only movie so far that might be more appealing than the book is Gone with the Wind. I mean, at least more popular than nobody reads. I think it's Margaret Mitchell who wrote it. I mean, am I correct? I think it was Margaret Mitchell. I mean, very few people read the text because there's Gone with the Wind, with what's his name? I can't remember what's her name? The actress who plays Scarlett. Anyway, it doesn't remember Lee something Janet. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So what I'm saying is, I think that the level of engagement can be found, and the engagement could be emotional, could be intellectual, it could be moral. I mean, if things are written or portrayed with any kind of depth and intelligence, I think they can really engage the author. Video games are exceptional in the sense that you can literally use your fingers to create different endings and realize how different endings can have different repercussions. So it's not the medium as such. To go back to what Jesse was saying, whether it's a movie or a book, it's what you do with a book and what you do with a movie that I think ultimately decide the level of engagement, of interest, and ultimately of durability and acclaim.
Mhm.
But do go see it. It's eye candy.
I was gonna watch it tonight, and after what you said, I don't know what to do.
No, I mean, it's so different from the book. It lacks depth and it lacks the moral aspect, and the acting was great and everything was great. But then again, it was supposed to be also about racism, and there's none of that. They're all very white, lily white, and I mean, Heathcliff was supposed to be like half black, half white in the original story. That was the whole point, that she fell in love with somebody who is beneath her racially as far as the Victorian context is concerned. But in the novel, all of this is weeded out. Like, her brother doesn't even exist. Hindley doesn't exist as a character. He who was basically the epitome of evil in the novel. So it was flattened in more ways than one, and ultimately it ended up being basically, as I said, eye candy, but not much more beyond that. But go see it, absolutely. You might like it for certain reasons. I did, for very few reasons, yeah. So
Well, I don't know, Sarah, if you have any plan for guiding the discussion, but I had a couple of questions for Syrine.
yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sure, you can go
If you
ahead.
had okay, I don't want to, take
No,
away
no.
from you and you schedule.
We still have time. You still have 30
We
minutes.
have lots of time. I had
Yeah.
a question for you though, because
Oh, sure.
I'm very interested in how you kind of made the connection between Tolkien and Gabriel Garcia Marquez,
Mhm.
and The Man with Enormous Wings, because I conceive of them as like two separate genres. I'm like, this is magical realism, and this is like fantasy, and I'm a big fan of fantasy literature. I devour the books. Sometimes when they end, I'm like, I don't want this to end. So I feel
Yeah.
really sad. I don't know
Yeah.
if I feel necessarily awe after I finish reading them. I'm
Mhm.
like, I want to be trapped in this magical world forever. So maybe my
Mm.
reaction is a bit more escapist. But I'm curious about the connection.
Mm.
Who are you asking me?
Uh, I'm asking you, Sangi.
Um, so the way I think of it, you've heard of Farah Mendlesohn, right?
Um,
Sarah Mendelson?
Farah Mendlesohn.
no.
She's a fantasy theorist, and so
Mm.
fantasy is the larger
Yeah.
genre, but underneath it are different subcategories. So the reason I made the connection is magical realism can fall under that, the
Yeah.
marvelous, the uncanny.
The Gothic.
Yeah, so there's one umbrella, and I was thinking about
Mm.
sisters and brothers under the umbrella.
Mm. Mm.
So
Mhm.
subgenres.
Right, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sarah, the
Because I'm
Gothic, the
still I'm
Gothic.
still not likely to find a man with wings in my outdoor barn.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to happen any more than I see a Balrog, and Gandalf. So
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, magical realism, as the very phrase implies, is basically you have funny things and weird things and unexpected things and impossible things happening on a street that you know very well. Whereas in a fantasy world, the whole thing, the entire infrastructure and whatever happens in it is made of fantasy, as opposed to elements from reality and elements from the world of magic. So it's not a complete suspension of disbelief in the case of magic realism. So, which is of course what Gabriel Garcia Marquez and many South American authors really excelled at, back in the middle of the 20th century. That's when it took off as a genre, as a subgenre, I should say. Right. So yeah. So there is that connection. So, and the Gothic novel, obviously, if you think of Vathek by William Beckford and all, because I teach Romanticism, I mean, the whole idea of gore and not so much gore or splash terror, what they call now, or splattering horror. There are even horror now. I mean, if you look at the horror, there are so many different kinds of horror. There's slasher. I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong word. Slasher horror. There is this and that. So, but you're right, all falls under fantasy, fantasy being the umbrella term, as Sangeeta said. And then you have the Gothic novel and all the others sort of like under this larger umbrella, right?
Oh, thank you so much, both of you. Yeah, we can now go ahead. Questions for Dr. Hout.
Dr. Holt, my question was about, I had two questions. One is, this is your chapter 6 that you talked about.
Yeah, it's a small part of chapter 6.
How does this part fit in with the larger, like what's your larger vision for the chapter? And how does this fit in?
Okay, right. So chapter 5 is about another novel that also treats, that looks at Arab immigrants in outside of the Arab world. So it's about 9/11 mostly. So the novel that basically I deal with in chapter 5 is called When All Else Fails. It's by a writer called Rayyan Shawaf, and it's about a young man who is actually from originally Iraqi, who is Christian, but everyone thinks he's Muslim because of his name and his looks. And he is studying in Orlando when 9/11 happens, and then he starts getting discriminated against, okay, because of his da-da-da. And now the other character that I talked about today, no, he's a second generation immigrant. He did not move to Australia. His parents did when they were children. But you're right, that's interesting. So what the two chapters have in common is the way code switching is a much more malleable identification marker than race, religion, ethnicity, nationality, and gender. You can language and language play and code switching between dialects and accents and languages and discourses is much more. First of all, it's there, right? And if you are smart enough and educated enough and multilingual enough, you can play with language in so many ways as to help you survive certain situations of, say, belligerence and hostility in post 9/11 America, in the case of the fifth novel, or discrimination also in the wake of 9/11 for these Arabs growing up in Western Sydney. So basically, I have a larger argument for the 6 chapters, but my sub-argument for the third part is how language, more than any other marker, such as, again, skin color, race, nationality, gender, whatever else you want to, or social class, is a much more used and much user-friendly, if you like, and available tool in one's hands to navigate oneself through certain collective ordeals, having to do with Islamophobia and anti-Arab sentiment, especially in the wake of 9/11, how you use language or languages and you very consciously play on what you say and how you say things and with whom you say them in order practically not only to survive, but sometimes also to thrive. So it's about code switching being a very useful and malleable tool, much more so than any other identification marker available to the protagonist. That's basically my sub-argument for part 3. In the other 2 parts, I talk about code switching as always signaling liminality, differences between dreams and reality, differences between Lebanon and the US. So always a state of, like they describe, threshold situations. And my sub-argument for the second part is about how it is a political satire, how code switching helps achieve political satire in not very overt terms, but sometimes quite covertly. So yeah.
So language and code switching is the overarching for the whole book.
Yes, yes. I
But
talk about code
displacement,
switching as a narrative strategy in 6 novels. And I have 3 pairings. And for each of the 3 pairings, I have a sub-argument. But basically, what I'm saying throughout actually are 2 things. First is that a lot of people say, a lot of theorists have said recently, and I go against many of them, is that if you have just like 1 word from Arabic or even 60 words from Arabic, say all related to cuisine, you have what they call shallow multilingualism. And I argue that it's not something that one should take with, that it's something one should take with a grain of salt, no pun intended, because it depends on how these words are used. Just because they are from cuisine, the local cuisine, doesn't mean that they are superficial. So that is my main argument, that a lot of code switching happens below the textual level, as in sometimes when you hear 2 people supposedly speaking in Arabic, but you don't even hear the Arabic, the bilingual person is still at an advantage, according to me, because even if there's no Arabic on the page, the bilingual can translate back mentally that which was indicated only as having been said in Arabic. So if 2 people say meet in a gallery and they said so and so in Arabic, okay, you don't see any Arabic. But if I speak Arabic and you don't, I am still getting a deeper picture than you are, because I can imagine or pretty much create almost 100% correctly what it is that they said and what added humor there might be in having mentally or reconstructed something or translated something back into the original language, even if it's not available in Arabic. So I talk about overt and covert code switching, and I claim that both are of equal importance. Pretty much. And I also argue that it's not the number or the frequency of the words, but how they relate to other parts of the text. For example, in one of my chapters, I talk about a novel that has a glossary where every single Arabic word is actually translated into English, but I claim that this glossary is actually deliberately misleading. And therefore, while you might think that the author is domesticating the Arabic, the bilingual reader is still at an advantage. Because they understand that these translations are not contextual enough, and therefore there's an added level or layer of criticism or political satire or even liminality, depending on the sub-argument I make in the 3 parts. So yeah.
So in this pairing here, the sub part is about identity and displacement, right? For the pairing.
They're all in a way or another about identities. So in the first part, I talk more about emotional identities, because one of them is literally dying of AIDS in one of the novels, and he can barely remember. And he goes back to Arabic because he has lost his grasp of English, which was his second language. So yeah. And then in the second part, I talk more about political identities. And in the third one, I talk more about diasporic identities. So I go from the intensely emotional to the political on the national level to the international, transnational / diasporic, permutations. So yeah, there is a progression in a way or another, but the main arguments are the same, that the bilingual reader is at an advantage.
Yeah, that gives like a big picture to contextualize. So I guess coming back to the granular,
yes.
I just want to know more. When you're writing your presentation, you're probably cutting out a lot of things you want to say.
Of course I am. I have to, yeah.
Can you say more? If you could have said more, can you say more about the very old man with the enormous wings?
Oh, he's not mentioned much in the novel. The text is only mentioned, in fact, it's not mentioned at all. That was my point. She tells him, read Marquez. But she doesn't tell the teacher with whom he is, in whom he is in love, right? Doesn't tell him which one. He chooses that text. Okay. That's the whole point. The only time she tells him what to read is when she says, read Lolita. That's a title, not an author. But when it comes to Joyce and when it comes to Marquez, she doesn't specify the title. So he being in love with her, chooses this particular short story because it's about an impossible love and this and that, especially in the case of The Dead by James Joyce. So it is not even mentioned in the text. I bring it out as a critic to explain why Bani might have chosen that text by this author, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, because the teacher never told him which title to read. He chose it, and I explain why he chose it.
And does that relate to the suppressed sexual desires that you were mentioning?
Overall, yes. Okay. But that more so in other parts, which I didn't get a chance to read in this presentation, because in other parts, he literally moves between literary language and Lebanese dialect, which I don't deal with here. It is the Lebanese dialect that shows the sexual desire. It is when he resorts to the higher language when he's actually trying to hide them, and when it comes to colloquial expressions is when he tries to express them. So, but that was not part of my presentation today. I couldn't. Today I was just dealing with the discursive code switches between word literature and Islam and Islamic texts and the Quran in particular. So it was very specific.
Well, thank you so much. I just really appreciated hearing about it.
Hopefully the book will come out, inshallah. I'm still waiting to hear the reader reviews, to receive the reader reviews. But Edinburgh has pretty much said that, they said that it's a very good fit, but it's now in the hands of readers. So I'm hoping for the best, but I will not know until the end of March, the beginning of April. And if it all goes well, maybe it will come out by the end of the year. So, yeah. You'll be the first to know, Sangeeta. If all goes well, once it's been redone, and hopefully the redoing will not be very onerous, and once it's sent back and finally approved, I will let you know. I will let Sarah know too, of course.
Oh, yes,
thank
please.
you.
I would love to know. Yeah, it's very exciting.
Inshallah,
I actually have a question for you, Dr. Hout. I'm very interested in this idea of code switching and creating meaning in these little spaces that kind of have potential of instability.
Yes, exactly. Instability is a good word. Yes.
Yes, because my work is on translingualism.
Yes.
And
which texts are you bringing into dialogue with one another, Sarah?
So I'm looking for my presentation on Friday. I'm going to talk about the Arab adaptation of Shakespeare's play Twelfth Night, and it's called The Speaker's Progress by Suleiman al-Bassam.
Yes.
And I'm very interested in how performance, because we talked about how the body is embodied and how it creates instability as well as this word play.
Yes.
And so I'm interested in how a non-Arabic reader would kind of create their own pockets of meaning in these spaces of instability and possible language confusion. So,
yeah, of course. I mean, there's something called creative chaos, right? And I find that I'm currently also writing an article about Tariq al-Aris's Water on Fire, which is this text right here that you can see. And there's a lot of code switching in it, but here I think it basically fulfills, it's to show threshold situations, right? So, and he talks a lot about the interaction between water and skin, and water appears always as water in English, ironically, but is code switched items in the mind of the reader wherever you go in the text. So I think that code switching is very important. Now, I admit there can be something called shallow multilingualism, where it's just marhaba and habibi, and you and I are very, and the word inshallah, right, which means God willing. Of course, there is something called shallow multilingualism, but my point in my book is that just because a certain word appears, like I have a chapter on a book that has only 2 words in Arabic and another one that has 60, but I argue that only 3 are pivotal. So not everything that appears as a code switch items is of equal importance or shines as much as others. So it's important for you to locate those locations in the text, especially in the Arabic translation, and perhaps try to look at, you're talking about an actual translation, not code switching. That's very different. Translation is something very different, right? It's when you turn a target text, a source text into a target text, which is what you're looking at from my understanding, right? And not your project, but in other projects, what is always very interesting to look at, if you're reading an original text, say written in English, with a lot of foreign words, what happens when that text is translated back into one of those foreign languages? Like if I have an Anglophone text with Arabic words in it, if I translate the whole thing into Arabic, what do I do with the Arabic that appeared as code switched items? Because if I just keep them as they are, the reader now of the translation will lose out on that obvious narrative strategy that had been followed in the earlier text, in the original source text. So that is a question that I have yet to grapple with, because I'm not dealing with translations as such. I'm dealing with what we can call maybe inner or authorial or self-translation happening within the text, but not from one to another. So there are slightly related but different questions. They are not the same questions. So I don't know if I don't think Shakespeare used many Arabic words, obviously, not in this case, but he might have used Latin words.
Yes.
And if
Uh-huh.
so, how many
Yeah.
and why, and in which context do they appear?
Mhm.
But if you're looking at translations or adaptations, it's always interesting to compare it with the original Shakespearean text and see where you see disparities and
Mhm.
see why those exist. Is it because of incompetence on the part of the translator, or is it deliberate? And those themselves might point you to certain sites of conflict within the text itself, or within one culture and another, the original English culture of the Renaissance and today's 20th century Arab culture. So translations always sometimes tell you more about this culture from which the translator has emerged than the original one. So yeah, and of course, some translations would be more faithful than others. Some would be more creative than others. It's a whole spectrum, right? So it ultimately depends on what it is that you want to argue overall, but also within that
Mhm.
particular chapter. So code
Okay.
switching has taken off really dramatically and in the
Mhm.
last 20 years or so. Sociolinguistics has always been popular, but literary linguistics only took off, I would say, around year 2000 and has been
Mhm.
growing apace since the turn of the third millennium. I mean,
Mhm.
now a lot is being said about it, but I hope that my book will try to say a few new things about it. I look at it as a strategy and focus on it and take it from there across
That's
six texts. Yeah.
that's very exciting. And
Mm.
I think when you say code switching,
Mhm.
that you mean like like let's say like someone mentioned tabbouleh in
Exactly. For example,
or
right,
hummus.
right,
If
hummus,
if
right,
they're
yes,
if they're
yeah,
a non-Arab reader, how would
yes.
they interact with like the mention of hummus?
Well, that depends on whether they're translated or not. And translations can take on different forms. There could be a glossary at the
Hmm.
end of the book. I mean, some of them have, but just because there's a glossary, again, I argue in one of my chapters, does not mean that it's straightforward or transparent
Yes.
due to incompetence or due to, I don't know, a lot of intentionality or due to happenstance or whatever. But ultimately, it does leave the bilingual reader with a certain advantage over the monolingual reader. Is it happening directly in between parentheses, like you say, then you explain what does it emerge from the context? They call it cushioning, right? Or contextual. So it depends on, and of course, when you translate it once, you're not going to translate it again. So the question is how it's translated and if it's translated in the first place. Bill Ashcroft talked about the metonymic gap in post-colonial Francophone and Anglophone novels, right? When there is a deliberate omission of a translation, as in, you know what? Go look it up if you're that interested. But I think it's always ultimately for a novel to be successful and to circulate well, there has to be some kind of a compromise. They cannot be too challenging. And if they're too facile, they will miss the mark as well. It's somewhere in between. It's what is called selective reproduction. You're not going to translate everything into Arabic if Arabic is your original culture, but only some items. The question is which items, where do they appear in the text? When do they appear in the story? Are they translated or not? And if so, how are they translated? And ultimately, is the translation really making it extremely accessible to the monolingual reader, or is the bilingual reader always, no matter what, at least at a slight advantage because of his or her greater knowledge of the culture from which this text originally emanated or refers to directly or indirectly? So it's, again, they fall on a spectrum. I mean, I think code switching falls on a spectrum from being rather simplistic and straightforward to being extremely complex and possibly invisible to the reader. Literally
Mhm.
almost invisible to the reader, which is why I argue today that these are just like if you read this, you don't think of the Quran, but I did because I know اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق, right? But not everybody is going to think of the Quran when they read this novel, not immediately anyway. I mean, again,
Mhm.
but it's not just knowledge of more than one language, it's cultural literacy. I mean, some people speak several languages, but they will not be culturally very much attuned to all of them. And you can speak one language, but really be a very smart reader and a very curious reader and look up things, even if you don't know the language that is other than your English. So it depends ultimately on the ambition of the reader, the IQ of the reader, to be honest, and ultimately on the level of engagement of the reader. So that makes you overcome certain problems. Should they be even seen as challenges? Let's call them challenges, linguistic challenges, right?
Mhm.
So yeah,
Okay.
so that's my long answer to you.
Thank you. That was
Yeah,
very helpful. Very
yeah.
interesting. I didn't consider it as like covert
Yes, code
switching.
switching. Mm.
That's very interesting. I didn't consider it as covert because to me it's overt.
Right,
But yes,
exactly. To
someone,
your bilingual mind.
yes.
Absolutely, that's right. Some people call it, Sarah, zero code switching. But the
Oh,
question, when it's completely not available on the page itself, but it's available here. And we are beings who are reading, and you bring so many texts when you read any given text. So the question is there really anything as plain and as simple as so-called zero code switching? I argue that it's not the case. There's always a certain level of self-translation happening in the mind of the reader. And some of the characters, also who's being excluded. Is it the monolingual reader? And sometimes it's the monolingual characters surrounding a multilingual one inside of the novel itself. So who's being shut out? Is it you or the readers or the characters or all three or all two? So these are complex questions that I think are differently answered depending on the text that you are dealing with. But just because a novel doesn't have a single foreign word doesn't mean it is not engaged in code switching. This is my ultimate conclusion. So be careful. It might be very covert, but right there, below the surface,
okay.
waiting to be excavated.
Yes.
Wait, what did you say? What would be under the surface? Code switching?
Covert code switching. As I just said,
Covert.
just because the novel may not actually show any other foreign word besides the English in which it is written, does not mean there is no covert code switching taking place.
Yes, okay.
But it's implied. It would be
Yeah.
implied. Yeah,
Yeah.
what I said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for these wonderful presentations. I learned so much today about your papers and about fantasy literature and hope. Now I'm going to approach it with a more hopeful lens when I read, hopefully. And it's very exciting, this work on covert and overt code switching in Lebanese novels. Or it's not considered the Lebanese novel, is it? It
It's
and
actually an Arab Australian novel.
okay.
Yeah,
And
we call
Australia.
it emergent inner Sydney, Australian literature. It depends on what it is that you want to emphasize. For my case, I like to use Anglo-Arab or Anglo-Australian because I'm focusing on matters of language. If I were focusing on other matters, I would simply call it emergent or sort of like 21st century Australian fiction without necessarily emphasizing the Arab aspect thereof. But because I'm focused on language, I am emphasizing originally the Arab, lineage of the author himself, even as a second generation immigrant.
Okay.
I just want to say to Sarah that I've been to Louisville like 4 or 5 times for real.
Oh,
Yeah, and I wanted to say that to Sangeeta as well. So I know Louisville. I wish I was there with you. I mean, I stayed at the Brown Hotel maybe, I don't know, 5 times.
also
I think,
we've seen each other.
I've been to Louisville 4 or 5 times, but recently, because AUB only pays for one conference per year, I've been going to another one, so this one has become virtual for me. But I love Louisville. I was there many, many times, at least 5 times. And
Wow.
I just wish you a good day in Louisville. I know the campus,
you.
I know everything about the city, and I loved it. And I remember once even I went to see the zoo in Cincinnati because it's so close in Ohio, right next to you guys. So
You think
yeah.
you'll come next year?
Sorry?
You think you'll come next year?
Maybe I will. Maybe I will. I will go to,
That would be great.
virtual, but real. So it's a fun thing. I mean, I need like 2 planes to get there. So Sarah knows all about it. And Sarah, I wish you all the best. It was lovely to see your
Thank
lovely
you.
face
It's
again. Best
great
of
to
luck to
see
you.
you.
If you need anything, let me know.
Thank you so much. We hope to see you in Louisville soon. Whenever you
Inshallah.
can come, we'd love to
And
have
Sangeeta, best of luck to you. It was lovely
Thank you.
meeting you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry we
Thank you for your
didn't get to see
presentation.
Bella, but I guess maybe.
Yeah, I don't know what happened,
Yeah.
but yeah, it
Yeah.
was great to see you both and to meet you, Sangi, as well.
Yes, thank you. And
Um,
thank you so much for facilitating.
of course,
Yeah.
Yeah.
of course, I'm very happy to. I hope you guys have a wonderful day.
You
Thank you
too.
so much. You too.
You too. Enjoy your day in Louisville. I hope it's not that cold anymore.
No, it's in the 60s today. So,
Enjoy. Okay, great. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you both very much
right.
and hope to see you on some other occasion.
all right. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.